I took the discharge packet from my 9-year-old niece because neither of her parents had come to take it. Kelsey was flushed from heat exhaustion, a bandage above her temple. The nurse said Todd's answer was, "It's not my week." Tracy's was, "I have real children at home now." Kelsey looked toward the ER doors. "Which one is coming?" I folded the packet into my bag. I thought I was taking her home for one night. I didn't yet understand the question her parents would spend 15 years trying to rename. Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you're doing well today. Stay with me, and if stories about family, choices, and consequences matter to you, subscribe to the channel so you can follow Kelsey's story to the end. The call had come while I was standing beside a pallet of surgical gloves at work, arguing with a supplier about a delivery that was 3 days late. I almost let it go to voicemail because I didn't recognize the number. Then I saw the local area code and answered. "Is this Gail Monroe?" "Yes. This is North River Medical Center. You're listed as an emergency contact for Kelsey Grant." Everything inside me tightened. What happened? The woman on the phone told me Kelsey had collapsed during her school's field day. She had been outside longer than she should have been, on an unusually hot May afternoon, had not drunk enough water, and had fallen hard enough to strike the side of her head. She was awake. She was stable. The doctors were watching her for signs of a concussion and giving her fluids. I asked the first question anyone in my position would have asked. "Where's her mother?" There was a pause that lasted just a little too long. "We've been trying to reach both parents." That was how I found myself driving across the Twin Cities with both hands locked around the steering wheel and every red light feeling personal. I knew Tracy and Todd's divorce had been ugly. I knew they argued about weekends, school pickups, summer vacations, dentist appointments, and who had changed the schedule without telling the other person. But adults arguing over a calendar was one thing. A 9-year-old in an emergency room was another. At the hospital, a nurse met me outside Kelsey's room and checked my identification before letting me in. The first thing I saw was Kelsey's school t-shirt, folded inside a clear plastic belongings bag. The second was the bandage just above her right temple. The third was the packet in her hands. She held it with both palms against her knees, as though somebody had told her not to lose it. "Kels." Her face changed when she saw me. Not dramatically. She didn't cry. She simply released a breath I hadn't realized she was holding. "Aunt Gail." I went to her and touched the back of my fingers to her cheek. She was still warmer than I liked. "You scared everybody." "I didn't mean to." "I know." Her lips were dry. There was an electrolyte drink on the tray beside her, half finished. "What did the doctor say?" "That I got too hot, and I hit my head." "Did you throw up?" She shook her head. "Dizzy?" "A little before," a nurse behind me said. "She's doing much better. The physician wants to finish observation, but her vitals have stabilized." I nodded. My work brain clicked on automatically. Stable. Observed. Follow-up instructions. Somebody responsible would need to take her home and watch for worsening symptoms. Then I looked back at the papers in Kelsey's hands. "What's that?" She looked down as if she had forgotten she was holding them. "They keep asking where to put them." That sentence landed harder than it should have. I took the packet from her and set it on the chair beside me. "You don't have to hold that." She studied the emergency room doors. "Is Dad coming?" The nurse's eyes moved toward me. I looked at her. She asked Kelsey if she wanted another drink, then motioned me into the hallway. I stepped outside. "What happened?" "We reached her father." "And?" The nurse hesitated. I said, "Please." He said, "It's not my week." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. "What?" He said the current parenting time belonged to Kelsey's mother. I stared at the nurse. Todd had always loved rules. Rules made him feel safe. Rules told him when he was right, when he was finished, when somebody else's problem began. He and Tracy had spent years treating their custody calendar like disputed territory. But I had never imagined he could look at an emergency room through the same lens. You told him she collapsed? Yes. You told him she was in the hospital? Yes. And he said it wasn't his week. The nurse didn't answer. She didn't need to. What about Tracy? We reached her too. Something in the nurse's face warned me before she spoke. She said she couldn't leave home. Why? She said she had 2 younger children there. I waited. The nurse looked uncomfortable. That isn't everything, is it? No. What did she say? The nurse lowered her voice. She said, I have real children at home now. I turned and looked through the narrow window in the door. Kelsey was still facing the hallway, waiting. My sister had said those words while her oldest child was lying in a hospital bed. I took out my phone and called Tracy. She answered on the 4th ring. Gail, thank God. Are you there? The relief in her voice made me angrier than if she had sounded cold. Yes. How is she? She's stable. Oh, good. I closed my eyes. Tracy, why aren't you here? Silence. Then she sighed. Neil's at work. Owen is 5. Sophie is 3. I can't just drag them both into an ER. You can arrange somebody to watch them. It isn't that simple. It is exactly that simple. Gail. No, don't Gail me. Your 9-year-old collapsed at school. And you said she's stable? I said she's stable now. I knew you'd go. That sentence stopped me. Not because it was flattering. Because she had built her decision around it. You knew I'd go. You're 10 minutes away. You're already on the school contact list. I'm almost 40 minutes from the hospital with traffic and 2 little kids at home. Then call Neil. Call a neighbor. Call me and say you're on your way. Do something other than decide that your daughter belongs to whoever is most convenient. Her voice sharpened. Don't make this uglier than it is. You told the hospital you have real children at home. Another silence. When she spoke again, she was quieter. I was upset. Kelsey is your real child. I know that. Apparently somebody needed to remind you. Gail, please. I've had a horrible day. Owen had a meltdown this morning. Sophie barely slept. Neil has a presentation. Todd refuses to cooperate with anything unless it's written into the schedule. I cannot handle another war tonight. I looked through the door again. Kelsey had picked up the plastic cup with both hands. This isn't a war. You know what I mean. No. I know what Kelsey means. She keeps looking at the door. Tracy exhaled. What do you want me to do? Come get your daughter. I can't tonight. The phrase hung between us. Not won't, can't. Tracy had always been good at turning choices into circumstances. How long? What? If I take her home tonight, when are you picking her up? We'll figure it out tomorrow. That isn't a date. Gail, she's safe with you. That isn't a date either. Please. Just tonight. Until things settle down. There it was. The phrase I had heard from Tracy since we were girls. Until things settle down. I had watched her use it for late bills, missed commitments, borrowed money, fights she didn't want to finish. Life never actually settled down. Somebody else simply absorbed the mess until she stopped talking about it. I'll take her tonight, I said. Tomorrow, one of her parents comes for her. Thank you. Don't thank me. Come tomorrow. I ended the call. Then I called Todd. He answered almost immediately. How is she? I laughed once, without humor. You could know that yourself. Gail, I talked to the hospital and told them it wasn't your week. There was no denial. Tracy has parenting time until Friday. She's 9, Todd. She isn't a rental car. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you made her sound like. You know how Tracy operates. The minute I start taking over every time she drops something, she'll expect it forever. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose. So your solution was to teach a 9-year-old that the emergency room respects your custody schedule. That's not fair. No, it isn't. He went quiet. I gave him the same question I had given Tracy. If I take her tonight, when are you coming? We should discuss it tomorrow, when everyone's calmer. Another version of the same answer. No date, no time. No promise a child could actually hold. You two can discuss whatever you want tomorrow, I said. But tonight Kelsey is learning something about both of you. I hung up before he could ask what I meant. The hospital social worker joined me a few minutes later. She explained what still needed to happen before Kelsey could leave. Tracy had legal authority under the existing custody arrangement, so they needed documented authorization before releasing Kelsey into my care. It was almost absurd how quickly Tracy became available when the responsibility could be transferred over the phone. She confirmed my name, gave permission, answered the hospital's questions, and returned the burden neatly to my hands without ever stepping into the building. The social worker checked my identification again, documented that both parents had declined to come, and confirmed that I was the safe adult taking responsibility for Kelsey's discharge plan. You're listed as her secondary emergency contact with the school? Yes. And she'll be staying with you tonight? Yes. Are you comfortable monitoring her? I am. She gave me the symptoms that meant I should bring Kelsey back immediately. Worsening headache, repeated vomiting, confusion, unusual sleepiness. I listened carefully and asked questions until I understood. Then I went back into the room. Kelsey looked at me. Which one is coming? There are moments when adults tell children lies because we convince ourselves hope is kinder than truth. I could have said your mother got delayed. I could have said your father is sorting something out. Instead, I sat beside her. Neither of them is on the way tonight. Her face barely moved. Oh, you're coming home with me. For how long? One night. I heard myself say it and immediately hated the phrase. Kelsey nodded. Okay. The doctor cleared her a little later. The nurse reviewed the instructions with me. I signed where I was supposed to sign as the authorized adult taking her home that night. Kelsey watched my pen. When we left, she carried the plastic bag with her school clothes. I carried the packet. At my place, she stood just inside the spare room and looked around. It was more office than bedroom. Desk against one wall. Bookcase. Fold-out bed. No toys, no posters, no evidence that a child belonged there. I can sleep here? For tonight. She put her plastic bag beside the bed. I found her one of my old t-shirts to sleep in. It hung almost to her knees. She folded her school clothes carefully and placed them on the chair instead of putting them away. Why don't you put those in the drawer? She shook her head. Mom might come early. I stopped. Maybe. What time? I don't know yet. She looked at me with the kind of patience children use when adults are failing to answer a simple question. You always know times. She was right. At work, my calendars had calendars. If a truck was arriving at 6:15, I wanted somebody at the dock at 6:05. If I was late, I called before I was late. I'll know in the morning, I said. That answer bothered me all night. I checked on her twice. Both times, she was asleep. Both times her school clothes were still folded on the chair. At 6:30 the next morning, I made coffee and checked my phone. A message from Tracy. Morning is crazy here. Can Kelsey stay with you today? We'll talk tonight. Then Todd. Let me know what Tracy decides. Technically, she still has parenting time. I read both messages twice. Not one contained a pickup time. Behind me, I heard bare feet. Kelsey stood in the kitchen wearing my oversized t-shirt. Is Mom coming? I looked at her, then at my phone, then at the small bag of school clothes she had brought into the kitchen with her. No one has given me a time yet. She nodded once and sat down at my table. That was the moment I stopped believing I was dealing with one bad night. Neither of Kelsey's parents had said they were abandoning her. They had done something easier. They had simply kept making the next hour somebody else's responsibility. By 8 that morning, Kelsey had eaten half a piece of toast and asked me 3 times whether her mother had called. The answer was yes. The useful answer was no. Tracy had called at 7:46 to tell me Owen had woken up with a fever. Sophie had spilled cereal across the kitchen floor. Neil had an early meeting, and everything at her house was a little insane. I let her talk until she stopped. "What time are you picking Kelsey up?" Silence. "Gail, I just told you what kind of morning I'm having. And I asked you what time you're coming. I can't give you an exact time. Morning, afternoon, evening, I don't know. Today?" Another pause. "Maybe it would be better if she stayed with you through tonight." I looked across the kitchen. Kelsey was at the table with her back to me, but I could tell from the way she had stopped chewing that she was listening. "Then tomorrow, what time? Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Turning everything into a deadline. Because soon does not pick up a child." Tracy lowered her voice. "She's comfortable with you. That has nothing to do with whose responsibility she is. I know she's my responsibility. Then give me a time." I said I don't know yet. I ended the call before we could say the same thing a fifth way. Todd called 20 minutes later. He had apparently spoken to Tracy. "I hear she wants Kelsey to stay with you another night." "She wants?" "That's not the point." "No, Todd. The point is that neither of you has come for her." He sighed. "Gail, I'm not trying to make your life difficult." "That's generous. My parenting time starts Friday." "It's Wednesday." "Exactly." I waited. He seemed to hear the problem in his own answer and continued quickly. "If Tracy needs coverage until Friday, that's between the two of you." "Coverage. That isn't how I meant it. It is the word you used." He became defensive. "I keep Kelsey on my health insurance. I cover the expenses I'm supposed to cover. I take my scheduled weekends. I am not some deadbeat father." I glanced toward the kitchen doorway. Kelsey had disappeared into the spare room. "I didn't call you a deadbeat. You're acting like I walked away from her." "You did yesterday." His silence this time was angry. Finally, he said, "I can pick her up Friday." "At what time?" "After work." 6? Probably. 6, Todd? "Yes. 6. It was the first actual time anybody had given me since the hospital. I wrote it on a notepad. Friday 6:00, Todd. "Thank you," I said. He sounded offended by the formality. When I went into the spare room, Kelsey was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the plastic bag from the hospital. She had taken out her school shirt and was trying to smooth the wrinkles with her hands. "Your dad says he'll pick you up Friday at 6. Her face brightened. "Friday? Friday. Can I still go to school?" "Of course." That answer turned out to be more complicated than I expected. The school secretary knew me. I was already listed as an emergency contact. That was enough for them to call me when nobody else answered. It was not the same thing as having permission to make every decision involving Kelsey. When I brought her in Thursday morning, the secretary handed me a form. "We need Tracy or Todd to update the pickup authorization if you're going to be doing this regularly." "I'm not doing it regularly." The words came out too fast. The secretary glanced at Kelsey, then back at me. "I just mean if plans change." "They won't." I believed that when I said it. Friday came. At 5:45, Kelsey put on her shoes. At 5:50, she carried the plastic hospital bag into the living room and placed it next to the couch. At 6, she sat beside it. At 6:10, she asked if there was traffic. There could be. At 6:23, my phone rang. "Todd." "I'm stuck at work." I closed my eyes. "How stuck?" "I have a client issue." "What time are you coming?" "I don't know." I looked at Kelsey. She was staring at the clock on my cable box. "Todd, I can take her tomorrow morning." "You said 6. "I know what I said." "So does she." That quieted him. He asked to talk to Kelsey. I handed her the phone. She listened. Okay. Another pause. No, it's okay. Another. Okay, bye. She gave the phone back to me. What did he say? He has work. I know. He said tomorrow. She picked up the plastic bag and took it back to the spare room. That night I called Tracy again. Your turn. What? Todd isn't coming. You come. Gail, Neil's parents are here. I actually laughed. That isn't an emergency. I never said it was. You have a car? Yes. You know where I live? Yes. So what stops you from coming? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, Kelsey is in the same school district with you. Her routine isn't being disrupted. Why would we move her back and forth while everybody is trying to sort this out? The sentence was so smooth that for a second, I almost missed what she had done. Yesterday, Kelsey was staying one more night. Now, moving her home was disruption. What exactly are we sorting out? You know Todd. Every schedule change becomes a fight. This isn't about Todd. It's always about Todd. No, it's about Kelsey. And she is safe. That word is doing a lot of work for you. Why are you trying to make her feel unwanted? I gripped the phone harder. I'm not the person who told a hospital I had real children at home. Her voice changed. I told you I was upset. Kelsey was the one in the emergency room. Do you think I don't know that? I think you know it intellectually. God, Gail. No. I'm done talking about feelings. I need logistics. If Kelsey is staying here longer than the weekend, I need authority to deal with her school, her doctor, her dentist, anything that comes up. Can't they just call me? They called you Tuesday. She went quiet. That was the first time I heard the weakness in her solution. If every ordinary decision still had to go through a woman who did not want to leave her house when her daughter was in an emergency room, then the arrangement was not merely unfair, it was unworkable. I'm not doing this indefinitely without paperwork, I said. You make everything sound so official. It is official. She is 9. What do you want? I want the authority to do the things you're asking me to do. I'm not asking you to raise her. Then tell me when she's going home. Again, silence. That silence answered more than she did. The hospital social worker had given me information about temporary caregiving arrangements before we left. At the time, I had put it in the back of the discharge packet because I was certain I would never need it. Now I pulled it out. There was a way for a parent to delegate certain day-to-day parental powers without surrendering parental rights or pretending an aunt had suddenly become a mother. School matters, routine medical care, records, transportation. The ordinary decisions that made childhood possible. I called Tracy back. We're doing this properly. She resisted the word properly, almost as much as the word responsibility. But when I explained that the arrangement did not terminate her rights and did not change the custody order, she relaxed. That bothered me more than if she had fought. She did not fear losing Kelsey. She feared inconvenience. By the following week, the documents had been prepared. Tracy signed the temporary delegation I needed for Kelsey's day-to-day care. Todd received the required notice and copies, and the school and medical authorizations were put in place. He made a point of reminding me that none of it altered the custody agreement. I know, and I'm still covering the expenses I'm supposed to cover. I know. She's still on my insurance. I know. He seemed dissatisfied that I wasn't praising him. I just want that clear. It's clear. What's that supposed to mean? It means the insurance card works whether or not you come when she needs you. He went quiet. I regretted the sharpness for about 3 seconds. Then I remembered Kelsey sitting beside her bag at 6 o'clock. The paperwork solved practical problems immediately. The school added me to the list of adults who could sign what needed to be signed. The dentist could talk to me. If Kelsey needed routine care, I didn't have to spend an hour tracking down a parent before I could schedule it. But paperwork had a strange way of making something real. The first time I signed my name beneath the words authorized caregiver, I stared at them longer than I should have. I was not her mother. I was not adopting her. I was not replacing anybody. The papers themselves made that clear. They were temporary. That word appeared everywhere. Temporary delegation. Temporary authority. Limited duration. I clung to every version of it. At home, I bought a cheap dry erase calendar and stuck it to the refrigerator. Kelsey watched me write. Monday. Bus home. Gale home 5:45. Tuesday. Gale pickup 4:30. Wednesday. Bus. Gale home 6:15. Mrs. Adler downstairs has key. Thursday. Dentist 3:30. Friday. Todd? I stopped at the question mark. Kelsey noticed. Is Dad coming? He hasn't confirmed. So don't write him. I looked at her. She shrugged. You said only write things you know. She was 9 years old, and she had already understood the rule better than both her parents. I erased Todd's name. Friday. Bus home. Gale home 5:30. There, I said. What if Dad calls? Then we change the calendar. What if you're late? I call before I'm late. What if your phone dies? Mrs. Adler knows where I work. The school knows where I work. You know Mrs. Adler's number. Kelsey considered that. So there's always another plan? There should be. She nodded as if I had explained a scientific principle. I did not quit my job. I did not tell my manager I had suddenly become unavailable for every meeting after 3. I adjusted what I could, asked for help when I needed it, and told Kelsey exactly when I would not be there. The first time I had to attend a late inventory review, I told her 2 days ahead. Mrs. Adler will get you off the bus. I'll be home by 7. At 7 exactly? Probably 6:45. 7 is the promise. At 6:52 that evening, I opened my front door. Kelsey was at the table doing multiplication problems. She looked at the clock. You made it. I said I would. It was not a grand moment. She didn't run into my arms. I didn't feel some sudden transformation into a mother. I put down my bag, reheated soup, and asked how school had gone. That was how most of our life started. Not with declarations, with Tuesday, with dentist appointments, with knowing there would be milk in the refrigerator, with somebody writing down a time and then arriving before it. Tracy still called. Sometimes she called every evening for 3 days, then disappeared for 4. When she did come by, she was affectionate. She hugged Kelsey. She brought a new shirt once, a book another time, and listened while Kelsey talked about school. Those visits confused me because they did not look like rejection. They looked like motherhood in small, pleasant portions. The problem was what happened when responsibility entered the room. One afternoon, Tracy sat at my kitchen table while Kelsey worked on homework in the spare room. I think she's doing better, Tracy said. Better than what? Than all the bouncing around. She wasn't bouncing around until you stopped taking her home. You know what I mean. No, actually, I've started asking people to say what they mean. Tracy ignored that. She likes it here. Yes. She loves her school. Yes. And changing everything again would be hard on her. I stared at her. There it was. Again. The transformation. First, Tracy could not take Kelsey because her new household was overwhelmed. Then Kelsey stayed because it was convenient. Now returning to her mother was being described as something that might hurt Kelsey. You realize you're talking about your own house, I said. Her face tightened. I'm talking about stability. Kelsey did not choose this. I didn't say she did. You're getting close. Tracy looked toward the hallway. Then she lowered her voice. Don't put things in her head. I'm not. You don't think she's happier here? That is not the same question. What is the question? When are you taking your daughter home? She rubbed her forehead. Why does everything have to be so black and white with you? Because children notice when adults make gray areas big enough to hide inside. Tracy stood. I'm not fighting with you. Then don't. She collected her purse. At the doorway, she stopped. You're comfortable here, right, Kels? Kelsey had come into the hallway, without either of us noticing. She looked from her mother to me. I guess. Tracy smiled too quickly. See? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Then Tracy added, And you don't really want to change schools now, do you? Kelsey looked confused. No. There. Tracy kissed the top of her head. We'll keep doing what works. After she left, Kelsey went back to her homework. I stayed at the kitchen table. Tracy had asked a 9-year-old whether she wanted to leave her school. She had not asked whether she wanted to live without her mother. But I could already hear how easily one answer might someday be made to sound like the other. The weeks became months. The delegation documents went into a folder in the small desk beside the spare bed. Todd continued covering the expenses the order assigned him and keeping Kelsey on his insurance. He exercised some of his scheduled time, missed other days, and always seemed most comfortable when he could point to something measurable that he had done correctly. Tracy continued saying the situation was temporary. Kelsey stopped asking every morning when she was going home. I noticed that before she did. One Saturday, I was carrying clean towels past the spare room when I stopped in the doorway. The plastic hospital bag was still under the bed. The suitcase Tracy had eventually dropped off sat beside it, unzipped. But Kelsey was standing in front of the dresser. She had a stack of shirts in her arms. She opened the top drawer and placed them inside. Not all of them, just 3. Then socks, then pajamas. She saw me watching. Is this drawer okay? I looked at the clothes, then at the desk. Inside its bottom drawer was the folder giving me temporary authority over her school forms, doctor visits, records, and ordinary care. Beside the dresser sat the suitcase that still had not been closed. Yes, I said. That drawer is yours. Kelsey nodded and kept unpacking. I stood there longer than I needed to. Temporary now had paperwork. Temporary had a school pickup list. Temporary had a toothbrush beside mine. And Temporary had just taken a drawer. The first time I renewed the papers, giving me authority to care for Kelsey, Tracy signed them at my kitchen table with a blue pen and complained about the traffic on the way over. That was what struck me most. Not the signature, not the date, the traffic. A year earlier, Tracy had insisted the arrangement was temporary. She had said Kelsey only needed somewhere calm until things settled down. Now another year had passed, and the only thing Tracy seemed eager to discuss was whether she could leave before rush hour. I slid the finished pages into the folder in my desk. These expire again next year. I know, so we're going to talk before then. Tracy was already putting the cap back on her pen. About what? I looked at her. About your daughter. Her mouth tightened. Gail, she's doing well. That had become Tracy's safest answer. Kelsey was doing well. Her grades were good. She had friends. She had not changed schools. She knew which bus to take home. She knew that on Thursdays I usually worked late, so Mrs. Adler downstairs kept a spare key. Every good thing in Kelsey's life was slowly becoming an argument for leaving everything exactly as it was. That doesn't answer the question. What question? Is she ever moving back in with you? Tracy glanced toward the hallway. Kelsey was in the spare room reading, not so loud. She knows where she lives. She doesn't need adults making her feel like there's something wrong with it. I stared at my sister. A year earlier, something had been wrong enough with Tracy's house that Kelsey could not return. Now even naming the arrangement was being treated as the harmful thing. I'm not trying to make her feel anything. Then stop treating this like a crisis. You left her with me after an emergency room visit. For one night. And then another. You agreed. For one night. Tracy sighed. You always do this. Do what? Keep score. No, I keep dates. She laughed without humor. Same thing with you. That afternoon, Kelsey came out after Tracy had gone and asked if her mother had been mad. She was irritated. At me? No. Kelsey nodded and opened the refrigerator. At 11, she had learned to ask that question in a tone that sounded casual. At 9, she had asked when her mother was coming. At 10, she had asked whether she was going home for summer. By 11, she asked if adults were angry at her. That change bothered me more than any argument Tracy and I had ever had. She said I can come Saturday, Kelsey said. That sounds good. Neil's taking Owen to soccer, but Mom said Sophie and I can bake something. You want to go? Kelsey shrugged. I think so. I almost asked what that meant. Then I stopped myself. Children were allowed not to have perfect language for complicated feelings. Saturday morning, I drove her to Tracy's house. Neil opened the door before Tracy reached it. He was holding a travel mug and wearing an old college sweatshirt. Hey, Kelsey. Hi. He stepped aside. We saved you one of those cinnamon things you like. Kelsey looked at me. What cinnamon things? Neil frowned. The little rolls, with the orange icing. You remember those? Of course. It was a tiny exchange. So tiny I might have forgotten it if the rest of the story had been different. Tracy appeared behind him. There she is. She hugged Kelsey tightly. Then she smiled at me. You can pick her up around 7. I thought she was staying overnight. Tracy blinked. Oh, did I say overnight? Yes. Right. I forgot Neil's parents are coming tomorrow morning. Neil turned. They are? Tracy looked at him. For brunch. Sunday? Yes. He took a drink from his mug. I thought that was next weekend. Tracy's smile did not change. Plans changed. Kelsey was watching them. I could see it. Not suspicion yet. Just attention. 7 is fine, I said. On the drive home that evening, Kelsey was quiet for almost 10 minutes. I let the silence sit. Finally, she said, Neil asked if I'm coming next month. For what? Owen's game. Do you want to? I guess. There it was again. I guess. What did your mom say? She said we'd see. I waited. Kelsey looked out the window. Neil said I should come more. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. What did you say? Nothing. Why? Mom said it's hard because they're busy. I glanced at her. Did Neil say that? No. That was the first time I noticed the gap. Not enough to call it a lie. Not enough even to call it suspicious. Just a gap. Tracy told Kelsey that Neil's home was complicated. Neil kept asking why Kelsey did not come more often. I stored the contradiction away without deciding what it meant. That was something I had learned at work. When two numbers did not match, you did not invent the missing number. You checked the records. For the next couple of years, our lives settled into something that would have looked ordinary to anyone who did not know how it started. Kelsey grew taller. Her handwriting changed. She stopped needing reminders to put her lunchbox in the sink. The spare room stopped looking temporary. There were science magazines on the floor, a cheap microscope on the desk, school certificates pinned above the bookcase, and a jar full of pencils she sharpened down to stubs. The delegation papers were renewed again. Then again. Each time, Tracy signed them. Each time, she had a reason why it made sense to continue. Kelsey was happy. The school was good. My work schedule was flexible. Todd was difficult. Neil's job was demanding. Owen needed more structure. Sophie was having trouble sleeping. Nothing Tracy said was completely absurd. That was the problem. Cruelty is easier to recognize when it arrives shouting. Tracy's version arrived, carrying reasonable sentences. Todd remained different. He did not build stories. He built categories. Insurance was his responsibility. His share of agreed expenses was his responsibility. His scheduled weekends were his responsibility. The rest belonged to whoever had been assigned it. Sometimes he picked Kelsey up exactly when he said he would. Sometimes work interfered. Sometimes Kelsey came home happy. Sometimes she came home quieter. But when I challenged him, he always reached for something measurable. I paid the orthodontist deposit. I know. I took her last weekend. I know. She's on my insurance. I know. Then why are you talking to me? Like I've done nothing. I never said he had done nothing. That would have been inaccurate. Todd's problem was that he kept believing doing something meant he had done enough. Tracy's problem was harder to define. She wanted to know everything important about Kelsey, without wanting to carry everything ordinary. When Kelsey got an A on a science project, Tracy wanted a picture. When Kelsey needed a ride to school early for the science fair setup, Tracy said mornings were impossible because of the younger kids. When Kelsey was invited to an advanced summer program, Tracy wanted the brochure. When the registration required a parent or authorized caregiver to spend an hour filling out forms, Tracy said, "You're better at that stuff." One evening she called while I was cooking. Kelsey said she got into that science program. She did. Why didn't you tell me? She told you. I mean before. She got the email yesterday. I'm her mother, Gail. I turned the burner down. Then act like one without waiting for the highlight reel. That's unfair. What part? I call her. You do. I see her. Sometimes. I cover expenses. Sometimes. Her voice sharpened. You think because you handle school forms you get to judge me? No. I think because I handle school forms, dentist appointments, bus schedules, sick days, permission slips, grocery lists, and everything else you call small, I know the difference between loving a child and managing the parts of her life that nobody applauds. There was a pause. Then Tracy said, "You like being needed." That one got through. I leaned against the counter. Maybe I do. She had not expected me to admit it. But that doesn't explain why you keep volunteering me. I never forced you. No. You made sure every alternative sounded worse. She exhaled. Kelsey is stable with you. She wants you involved, I said. I am involved. She wants more than updates. You don't know what she wants. That sentence stayed with me, because Tracy was right about one thing. I did not always know what Kelsey wanted. So I started asking instead of assuming. Not about the whole arrangement. Not yet. About smaller things. Your mom invited you Sunday. Do you want to go? Yes. Your dad wants to switch weekends. Are you okay with that? I guess. Do you want me to tell him no? No. Do you want me to tell him yes? Kelsey looked at me. You ask too many versions of the same question. I smiled. Occupational hazard. She rolled her eyes, but she answered. Yes, I'll go. That was how I tried to keep from becoming another adult who decided things for her, because I thought I understood better. I did not always succeed. There were times I assumed she wanted distance because she did not complain. Times I mistook quiet for comfort. I would understand that later. The first real crack in Tracy's story came during an ordinary Sunday afternoon when Kelsey was 13. There was no holiday, no birthday, no family emergency, nothing dramatic enough that anybody would have remembered the date, if it had not changed everything. Tracy had invited Kelsey over while Neil took Owen to a soccer game. Sophie was 7 by then, old enough to repeat a family explanation she had heard without understanding what it carried. I dropped Kelsey off a little after noon. Neil was outside loading folding chairs into the back of his SUV. Kelsey, he smiled when he saw her. You coming to Owen's game? I thought it was just me and Mom today. Neil looked toward the house. Oh, then he shrugged. Another time. He closed the hatch. You should come sometime. Owen keeps asking. Kelsey gave him a small smile. Okay. Tracy opened the front door. Kels, come inside. There was something in her tone. Not anger, urgency. I noticed it, but I did not understand it. When I picked Kelsey up 4 hours later, she climbed into the car and buckled her seatbelt without saying hello. I waited until we were 2 blocks away. Bad day? No. Good day? She looked out the window. I don't know. I kept driving. That was another rule I had learned with Kelsey. Silence worked better when you did not chase it. At the next light, she spoke. Sophie asked me something. What? She asked why I don't like them. I turned my head. What? Them? Her and Owen? What did you say? I said I do. The light changed. I drove forward. And? She said. Then why didn't you want to live with us? For a few seconds, the only sound in the car was the turn signal clicking. What did you tell her? I said nobody asked me. My stomach tightened. What did Sophie say? She said Mom told them I liked living with you better. I kept my eyes on the road. Anything else? She said Mom told them I didn't want to move in because I didn't want to change schools. There were pieces of truth in that sentence. Kelsey did like her school. She was comfortable with me. By then she probably would have hated being uprooted. But none of those facts had caused the arrangement. They had come after it. Did Tracy hear you? Kelsey nodded. What did she say? She said Sophie misunderstood. Did Sophie misunderstand? I don't know. What happened after that? Mom said we should order pizza. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly Tracy. When a conversation moved somewhere dangerous, she changed the room. Food, plans, a movie, something normal enough to make everybody feel rude for continuing. Kelsey looked at me. Aunt Gail? Yes? Did Mom ever ask me? I knew what she meant before she finished. Ask you what? If I wanted to live with you? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I remembered the emergency room. Just tonight. I remembered the first morning. Can she stay today? I remembered the first paperwork. She's stable with you. I remembered Tracy in my kitchen. You don't really want to change schools, do you? That had sounded like a question. It had not been one. I don't remember her asking you that, I said. Kelsey looked down at her hands. Did Dad? No. She was quiet. Then she asked, Did Neil not want me there? I don't know. You said Mom said the house was complicated. She did. So maybe he didn't. Maybe. She turned toward me. You don't know? No. That surprised her. For years, I had been the person with answers. Bus times, doctor appointments, where the insurance card was, which drawer held the batteries, when the delegation paperwork expired. But this was different. I know what your mother told me, I said. I know what Todd did. I know what I did. I don't know what Neil said in conversations I wasn't part of. Kelsey looked back out the window. At home, she did not go straight to her room. She sat at the kitchen table while I made dinner. After a while, she said, Neil always asks if I'm coming to things. I've noticed. And Mom says they're too busy. Yes. Sophie thinks I didn't want them. Yes. I set the knife down. Kelsey stared at the refrigerator calendar. The same kind I had used since she was 9. Dates. Times. Things that either happened or did not. No motives. No explanations. Just what people had actually committed to doing. She looked at me. Who told them I didn't want them? I had no answer. And, for the first time, I realized that might be the question that mattered most. Kelsey did not ask the question again that night. That made it worse. She ate dinner, finished her homework, rinsed her plate, and went to her room as if nothing had shifted. But I knew her well enough by then to recognize the difference between silence that meant peace and silence that meant she was rearranging something inside herself. The next morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. Aunt Gail? Yeah? What exactly happened at the hospital? I turned off the burner under the kettle. She had asked pieces of that question before. Why had she stayed with me? Why had her mother not come? Why had Todd said it was Tracy's time? But this was different. She was 13 now, old enough to hear an answer without needing me to soften every edge. What do you want to know? Everything you actually know. The wording stopped me. Not what I thought. Not what I believed Tracy meant. What I actually knew. I sat across from her. You collapsed at school. The hospital called your dad first. What did he say? I had spent 4 years wondering when that sentence would come back. He said, "It's not my week." Kelsey stared at me. Exactly? Yes. You're sure? Yes. She looked down. What did Mom say? I wished I could give her one ugly sentence at a time. But she had asked for facts. She said she couldn't leave home because Neil was working and Owen and Sophie were there. That's not all. It was not a question. I shook my head. No. What else? I heard the nurse's voice again as clearly as I had that night. She said, I have real children at home now. Kelsey did not move. Not for several seconds. Then she rubbed the side of her thumb against a scratch in the kitchen table. How old were Owen and Sophie? 5 and 3. And I was 9. Yes. She nodded slowly. Did she know I was okay? She knew you were stable by the time we spoke, but she knew you had collapsed and been taken to the ER before she said it. Kelsey swallowed. What did you say? I reminded her that you were her real child. That's not what I meant. I waited. What did you tell me? The question went straight through me. That was harder. I had not lied to Kelsey outright that night. But honesty was not only about avoiding false sentences. I told you neither of them was coming that night. And before that? I said I didn't know yet. After? I kept telling you we were waiting for them to work things out. Her eyes stayed on me. Did you believe that? Yes. For how long? I considered lying for my own comfort. Instead, I said, longer than I should have. She looked away. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to tell her she was 9, that I thought protecting her from adult failure was part of caring for her, that I was trying not to turn every delay into proof that her parents did not love her. I stopped. Explanations were beginning to look dangerous to me. Kelsey had already lived inside too many of them. I thought the arrangement would change, I said. That's the truth. She nodded once. Okay. Then she left for school. That evening, she called Tracy. She did it from the kitchen table with me in the next room. I could hear her side of the conversation, not Tracy's words. Mom, did I ever tell you I wanted to live with Aunt Gail? Silence. No. I'm asking if I said it. Another pause. I know I liked my school. Kelsey's voice became flatter. That isn't what I asked. I stopped pretending to read the mail in my hands. Did I ever say I didn't want to live with you? Longer silence. Kelsey looked at the wall. No, I'm not upset because Sophie said something. She listened. Mom, then, quietly, please stop answering a different question. That sentence made me look up. There are moments when a child changes in front of you without moving. Kelsey did not sound angry. She sounded tired of being redirected. When the call ended, she placed the phone on the table. What did she say? Kelsey gave a small shrug. That I was happy here. Anything else? That moving me would have been cruel because I was settled. That changing schools would have hurt me. That you had more time. Did she answer yes or no? No. I sat down across from her. What do you think that means? I don't know. It was the right answer. The next call was to Todd. He answered while Kelsey was still at the table. This time she put him on speaker after asking if I minded. I did mind, but not enough to stop her. Dad, did I ever tell you I wanted to live with Aunt Gail? Todd was quiet for a moment. Why are you asking that? Because Sophie thinks I did. Sophie? My sister. I know who Sophie is. Then answer. Todd sighed. Kels, back then your mother was making decisions about her household. That's not an answer. It was her parenting time when all this started. You said that already. I'm trying to explain the context. I don't want the context yet. Did I tell you I wanted to live with Aunt Gail? No. The word came cleanly. Kelsey's face changed. Not relief, something sharper. Did Mom tell you I wanted to? Todd hesitated. She said you were doing well there. That isn't the same thing. No. Did you ask me? He was quiet again. No. Kelsey rubbed her forehead. So why didn't you make me live with you? Todd inhaled. That wasn't how the custody arrangement worked. I closed my eyes. He still could not resist the rule. You could have changed it, Kelsey said. It wasn't that simple. Why? Your mother and I fought about everything. You were settled with Gail. You were doing well in school. I didn't think dragging you through another custody fight would help. Kelsey stared at the phone. So you didn't want to fight Mom? That's not what I said. It kind of is. Kelsey. She looked at me. I gave her nothing. No rescue. No interpretation. This was her conversation. Todd continued. I thought keeping things stable was better than making everything worse. There was that word again. Stable. Kelsey heard it too. I could tell. Okay, she said. That's it? For now. Kels, I love you. She paused. I know. Then she ended the call. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Finally she said, They both say stable. Yes. But Mom says it was what I wanted. Yes. And Dad says it was what she was supposed to deal with. Yes. And neither one asked me. No. She leaned back in the chair. Do adults just keep saying the same word until it becomes true? I almost smiled. Instead I said, sometimes adults keep saying the same word until it becomes easier to live with. She absorbed that. Then she stood. I want to ask Neil. Tonight? No. Why not? Because Mom will be there. I understood. That bothered me too. Not because I thought Tracy would threaten anyone. Because I had started noticing how often she answered before other people could. The next few weeks were quieter. Kelsey did not become obsessed with proving something. She did not search old emails. She did not record calls. She did not turn her life into an investigation. Instead, she started watching. That was harder. When Tracy promised to call Tuesday night, Kelsey did not remind her. Tracy called Wednesday afternoon. Kelsey said nothing about the missed day. When Todd said he might come to a school event, Kelsey wrote the event on our calendar, but did not add his name. You didn't put Dad down, I said. He said might. I nodded. Fair. At dinner one night, Tracy called and asked what Kelsey was doing that weekend. Kelsey told her. Tracy said something I could not hear. Kelsey answered, If you want to come, come. Another pause. No, you don't need Aunt Gail to remind you. She ended the call and went back to eating. I watched her. What? Nothing. You're staring. I'm adjusting. To what? To you getting smarter than all of us. She rolled her eyes. I'm not smarter. No? I just don't want to ask people if they care anymore. The sentence was too heavy for 13. I set my fork down. Kelsey. What? You're allowed to ask people for things. I know. You're allowed to remind people. I know. Don't turn this into a test nobody knows they're taking. She thought about that. That's not what I'm doing. What are you doing? I'm trying to see the difference between what people say and what happens. I could not argue with that. Because I had spent years doing the opposite. I had heard Tracy say temporary and treated the word as more important than the drawer full of clothes. I had heard Todd say custody schedule and treated the rule as more important than the empty chair beside Kelsey at 6 o'clock. I had listened to explanations because explanations made adults seem more reasonable. Kelsey was beginning to look at outcomes. A few days later, she found me sorting paperwork at the desk in the spare room. The caregiving folder was open. She sat on the edge of the bed. "What are those?" "The papers your parents signed so I can deal with school and medical stuff." "They sign them every year?" "More or less." "Why?" "Because the authority is temporary." She looked at the folder. "How many times?" I counted. "Several." "So, every year they sign something saying I stay here?" "That's simplifying it." "Am I wrong?" I looked at her. "No," she nodded. "Did anyone ever write down why?" "Not in the way you mean." "Did anyone ask me before the first one?" "No." That answer hurt more now than it had when she first asked it in the car, because the papers made the pattern visible. Adults had renewed an arrangement around her again and again. She had been the subject of the decision, never the author of it. Kelsey touched the edge of one page. "Mom says I chose this. She says you were comfortable here. She says I wanted to stay. She has said things close to that." Kelsey looked at me. Did I? I could have told her she seemed happy. I could have reminded her how much she loved her school, her friends, her room, but that would have been another adult taking later evidence and pushing it backward. "You adapted," I said. "That isn't the same as choosing how it started." She was quiet. Then she asked the question that had been growing since Sophie spoke in the car. "Did anybody actually ask me where I wanted to live?" I thought through every phone call, every renewal, every argument, every conversation where Tracy said Kelsey was stable, every time Todd said the schedule made something somebody else's responsibility. I could not find one. Not that I ever heard. Kelsey lowered her eyes. I expected tears. They did not come. Instead, she said, "Then I'm done asking what they meant." I waited. She looked at the calendar on my wall. "I'm going to watch what they do." That was the first decision she made about the past that belonged entirely to her. And I knew enough by then not to tell her what it should mean. Kelsey waited almost 3 months before she asked to stay at Tracy's house for a week. She did not announce it like a challenge. She was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing an apple, when she said, "Spring break is coming." "I'm aware." "Mom asked if I want to stay there." I looked up from the stack of invoices I had brought home. "Do you?" She placed 2 slices on a plate. "I think I should." That was not the same answer. "Why?" Kelsey leaned against the counter. "I want to know what it's like when nobody's explaining it to me." I understood immediately. Since the conversation with Sophie, Kelsey had stopped asking me what I thought Tracy meant. She had stopped asking whether Neil liked her, whether Todd really cared, whether the arrangement had started because adults thought they were protecting her. She was watching. Now she wanted to watch from inside the house that had supposedly been too complicated for her. "You don't owe anybody a week," I said. "I know. And you don't have to prove anything." "I know. If you want me to say no, I'll say no." "I don't." I studied her. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Drive me there Saturday." That was all. No speech. No secret plan. No promise that she would finally discover one clean answer capable of fixing the last several years. Saturday morning, Kelsey packed enough clothes for 7 days. Not the old plastic hospital bag. That had disappeared years earlier. A normal duffel bag, jeans, t-shirts, 2 books, her toothbrush, a small notebook she used for school. When I saw it, I asked, "Planning to take notes?" She gave me a look. "It's homework." "Just checking, Aunt Gail. I'm done." I drove her to Tracy's house shortly after 10. Owen was 9 by then. Sophie was 7. Neil had aged in the ordinary way people do when you only see them occasionally. A little more gray at the temples, deeper lines beside his eyes. He opened the door. "Kelsey, hi. You're really staying the whole week? If nobody changes the plan. He laughed. I walked into that one. Tracy appeared behind him. We are not changing anything. She hugged Kelsey. Then she looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. Relief mixed with performance. This will be good for everyone. I did not answer. Tracy took Kelsey's bag. You can use the guest room. Kelsey glanced at me. Not her room. The guest room. I wondered if she noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything by then. Before I left, I reminded her of one thing. You call if you want to come home. Tracy bristled. She's not going to need rescuing, Gail. I didn't say rescue. Kelsey looked at me. I know. That was enough. The first call came that evening. Not an emergency. Kelsey wanted to know where I kept the charger for the old camera she had borrowed for a science assignment. Top drawer of the desk. I looked. Under the envelopes. A pause. Found it. I could hear television in the background and Sophie laughing about something. You okay? Yeah. How's the house? Normal. There was something almost disappointed in the way she said it. Normal can be useful. I know. She lowered her voice. Neil made spaghetti. Dangerous. It was actually good. I'll alert the authorities. She laughed. That laugh mattered. Not because it proved anything about Neil. Because Kelsey had gone into that house expecting to feel like an intruder. For at least one dinner, she had not. The next 2 days, I heard almost nothing. I forced myself not to call. That was harder than I expected. Not because I believed Tracy would hurt her, because for years I had been the person who knew when Kelsey got off the bus, when she ate, when she needed poster board for school, when her stomach hurt because she was worried instead of sick. Now she was somewhere else by choice. That mattered too. On Monday evening, she texted me, still alive. Neil burned garlic bread. I wrote back, a tragedy. Stay strong. She sent a laughing face. Tuesday she called. This time her voice was different. Not frightened. Focused. What happened? I asked. Nothing bad. That usually means something happened. She was quiet. Then she said, Sophie asked if I remembered her 6th birthday. Do you? No. You would have been 12. I know. I waited. She said Mom told them I didn't come because I wanted to stay with you. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you remember? I remember Mom telling me they were doing something small because Sophie had friends from school coming. I remembered that too. Tracy had told me there was no point making Kelsey drive across town for a little children's party she would probably find boring. I had accepted it. What did you tell Sophie? That Mom told me it was just her school friends. What did Sophie say? She said she asked why her sister wasn't there. I closed my eyes. There are losses that look enormous while they are happening. Hospitals, funerals, doors closing. Then there are losses so small, nobody marks them. A birthday cake. A chair never set. A little girl wondering why her sister did not come. What happened after that? I asked. Mom came in. I waited. Kelsey continued. She said Sophie was remembering it wrong. Did Sophie agree? No. What did Tracy do? She asked if we wanted ice cream. That almost made me laugh. Pizza when Kelsey was 13. Ice cream now, same move. Different food. Kels. I know. Know what? She changes the room. The phrase stayed with me. How are you feeling? I don't know yet. Want me to come get you? No. You sure? Yes. Okay. Before she hung up, she said, I want to stay. Then stay. The next call did not come until Thursday. This one was shorter. Aunt Gail? Yeah? Did Mom ever tell you Neil didn't want me living there? I sat down. She told me his household wasn't ready for a complicated custody situation. Those exact words? Not always, but that was the meaning. Did Neil ever say it to you? No. Ever? No. She went quiet. What happened? I asked him. My pulse changed. When? Tonight. I did not ask for details immediately. I knew Kelsey would tell me what she wanted me to know. Finally, she said, "We were cleaning up after dinner." Okay. Mom took Sophie to get something for school. Owen was downstairs. I listened. I asked Neil if he ever told Mom he didn't want me living here. And? He looked at me like I'd asked if he'd robbed a bank. Despite everything, I smiled. What did he say? He said no. One word. No. 7 years of explanation shifted underneath it. Kelsey. He said Mom told him I didn't want to move. I said nothing. She told him I loved my school, that I was settled with you, that making me move into a new house with 2 little kids would be selfish. Those words sounded familiar. Stable. Settled. Best for Kelsey. They had traveled farther than I knew. What did you say? I told him Mom told me his house wasn't ready for me. Silence stretched between us. What did Neil say? He asked what that meant. And? I told him what I thought it meant. Which was that he didn't want a custody mess in his house. Kelsey's breathing came through the phone. He said he never told her that. I leaned forward. Did he say he wanted you living there? No. That answer mattered. Good, I said. What? Good that you're not turning one lie into another answer. Kelsey was quiet. Then she said, he said he assumed Mom had talked to me. That sounds believable. He should have asked. Yes. So should you. The words hit cleanly. I did not defend myself. Yes. He said he thought I chose you. I know. You didn't know that. No. I mean, I know he should have asked. Another silence. Then Kelsey said, everybody thought somebody else had already asked me. That sentence did more damage than anger could have because it was true. Each adult had assumed someone else had already asked Kelsey, and the paperwork kept the arrangement moving while her supposed preference hardened into family history. What are you going to do? I asked. Nothing tonight. Good. I'm tired. Also good. That doesn't make sense. You don't have to solve your childhood before bed. That earned a small laugh. Night, Aunt Gail? Night. Friday afternoon, Tracy called me. Not Kelsey, me. I don't appreciate what you've been encouraging. I had expected the call. I haven't encouraged anything. She's interrogating everyone. She asked Neil one question. She's making him feel like he did something wrong. Did he? That's not the point. It seems relevant. Tracy lowered her voice. I invited her here so we could spend time together. She came because she wanted to. I invited her because I thought we could have a normal week. Then let her ask a normal question without treating it like an attack. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She sounds like you now. What does that mean? Everything has to be documented, defined, dissected. No. She asked whether your husband rejected her. He never rejected her. Then why did Kelsey spend years thinking he did? Tracy said nothing. I waited. Finally, she replied, she was doing well with you. There was no reason to create chaos. Neil thought she chose me. He knew she was happy. That is not the same sentence. Why are you obsessed with wording? Because wording is where you keep moving responsibility. Her voice sharpened. I am her mother. Yes. And I made the best decision I could at the time. That's a new version. What is wrong with you? Nothing. I'm listening. You've always wanted to think you're the responsible one. There it was again. The old accusation. Maybe some part of it was true. I liked order. I liked being the person who knew what came next. But none of that answered the question Kelsey had asked Neil. Tracy, I'm not the problem you need to solve tonight. You've turned her against me. No. You think she would be asking these questions if you hadn't spent years judging me? Yes. She stopped. Why? Because Sophie asked why Kelsey rejected them. Silence. She didn't reject them. I continued. And apparently Neil thought Kelsey rejected your house too. It wasn't like that. Then tell her what it was like. I have. No. You've told everybody a version they could live with. She hung up. I sat at my desk for several minutes, after the line went dead. Part of me wanted to drive over immediately. Not because Kelsey was in danger, because I wanted to see what was happening. That impulse embarrassed me. This was exactly what Kelsey had asked for. A chance to observe without me standing beside her translating the experience. So I stayed home. Saturday morning, I expected Kelsey to call for a ride early. She did not. At noon, she texted, "Can you get me at 3?" I replied, "Yes." At 2:48, I parked outside Tracy's house. Kelsey came out carrying her duffel bag. Tracy followed. Behind them, Neil stood in the doorway. Owen and Sophie were somewhere inside. Tracy looked strained. Kelsey looked tired. No one looked triumphant. Tracy reached for Kelsey's shoulder. "We'll talk later." Kelsey stepped just far enough away that Tracy's hand fell before touching her. "Okay." Then she got into my car. I put her bag in the back. We drove for several minutes. Before I asked, "Home?" Kelsey looked at me. It was still the word I used without thinking. "Home." She nodded. "Home." We did not talk until we were halfway there. Then she said, "Mom wanted a picture this morning." "A picture?" "All of us." "Why?" She said since I'd been there all week. "We should have one." I waited. I said no. "Why?" Because she was acting like the week meant something. It didn't. What did she think it meant? That everything was fixed. "And what did it mean to you?" Kelsey looked out the window. "That I was right to ask." I let that sit. After another mile, she said, "Neil apologized." "For what?" "For never asking me." "That sounds fair." "He said he honestly thought I wanted to stay with you." "Do you believe him?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Do you forgive him?" She looked at me. "I didn't say that." I nodded. "Fair. He was an adult." "Yes." "He could have asked." "Yes." "But Mom told him one thing and told me another." "Yes." Kelsey pressed her forehead against the cool window. She made it sound like we were all keeping away from each other because that was what everybody wanted. By then the pattern was clear. Tracy had not needed everyone to believe the same story. She only needed each of us to believe the version that kept us from asking the next question. When we reached my house, Kelsey carried her bag inside. She did not unpack immediately. For a second, seeing the duffel on the floor brought back the 9-year-old who had kept her school clothes ready because she thought her mother might arrive in the morning. But this time was different. Kelsey was not waiting to be collected. She had chosen where to return. I went into the kitchen and started water for tea. A few minutes later, she joined me. Her eyes were red, but she had not cried. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I shook my head. Owen and Sophie thought I didn't want them. I sat across from her. They were kids too. "I know. Sophie was 3 when you came here." "I know." "They were told a story." "I know." She rubbed her palms together. "I spent years thinking they had this whole family that didn't have room for me." I waited. "And they spent years thinking I had Aunt Gail and didn't want them." She finally looked at me. Mom made both sides feel rejected. I had no useful correction, so I gave her the truth. "Yes." Kelsey looked toward the hallway. The refrigerator calendar was visible from where we sat. Her school deadlines, my work schedule, a dentist appointment. Nothing dramatic. Things we had written because they were supposed to happen. After a while, she said, "They thought I left them." I reached across the table, but I stopped before touching her hand. Kelsey closed the distance herself. She put her fingers over mine. And that was when I understood what she had actually brought home from Tracy's house. Not proof that Neil was innocent. He wasn't. Not proof that Tracy had planned every consequence. I did not believe she had. Kelsey had brought home something harder. The knowledge that years of distance between children could be built without anybody ever saying, "I reject you." All it took was one adult telling each side that the other had already chosen. The last time I renewed the paperwork that let me make routine decisions for Kelsey, I already knew there would not be another renewal. She was 17. The form sat on my kitchen table beside a college brochure and a bowl of apples, looking almost ordinary after all those years. Tracy signed first. She barely read it. Todd signed his part 2 days later and asked me whether I still needed copies of his insurance card. That was the difference between them by then. Tracy treated the paperwork like proof that the arrangement worked. Todd treated it like proof that he had fulfilled an obligation. Kelsey treated it like something with an expiration date. She picked up the folder after both signatures were done and looked at the end date. My birthday. Close enough. So after that, nobody gets to tell me whose week it is. I looked at her. No, she smiled a little. I like that. By then, Kelsey had stopped asking when she would go back to Tracy's house. She also stopped treating my home as somewhere she had landed by accident. Her clothes filled both drawers in the spare room. Her books were stacked too deep on the shelves. A periodic table hung above the desk, covered with tiny notes I did not understand. She still called the room the spare room. I never corrected her. In the spring of her senior year, college mail started arriving almost every day. Some envelopes were thin enough to disappoint before she opened them. Others came with glossy folders and cheerful letters, promising opportunity in language so polished, it almost sounded expensive. One afternoon, I came home and found Kelsey sitting at the kitchen table with a packet open in front of her. She did not look excited. That worried me more than if she had been crying. What happened? She pushed the packet toward me. I read the first line. Congratulations. Then I read it again. You got in. I got in. To the combined program? She nodded. 6 years. Undergraduate work integrated with medical training. A structured path directly out of high school. Competitive enough that I had spent months refusing to discuss odds with her. I looked at the letter, then at her. You don't look happy. I am. That face says someone just told you your dog owes taxes. She laughed. I'm thinking. About what? Money. There it was. Not destiny. Not fate. Not some dramatic promise made in a hospital bed. Money. Housing. Loans. Travel. The ordinary architecture behind an extraordinary opportunity. We spent that evening with a calculator. Merit aid covered part of it. Institutional aid covered another piece. There would still be federal loans. Todd had already said he would contribute a fixed amount each year. Tracy had promised, whatever we can manage, which was not a number, and therefore did not make it onto my spreadsheet. I could help some. Not everything. Not even close. I don't want you paying for all this, Kelsey said. I couldn't if I wanted to. Good. I looked at her. She smiled. I mean, not good. You know. I know. She tapped the page. I can do this. You can. I'll owe money. Yes. A lot? Enough that you should understand every page before signing. She groaned. You sound like a bank. I sound like someone who reads contracts. You read cereal boxes. Because information matters. That made her quiet. Then she looked at the medical school brochure again. I like that. What? That there's always a reason. For what? In medicine. I raised an eyebrow. She corrected herself. Not always, but you look for one. You don't get to call something whatever makes you feel better. If the numbers are wrong, they're wrong. If a symptom doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. I knew what she was talking about without asking. For years, Kelsey had lived around adults who changed the names of things. Abandonment became stability. Silence became choice. Distance became what was best. Medicine appealed to a part of her that trusted evidence more than explanation. But I also knew better than to make her entire future about our family. You liked biology before any of this got complicated. I know. You took apart my blood pressure cuff when you were 11. I put it back. Incorrectly. It still worked. Eventually. She grinned. That was enough. Kelsey did not become a doctor because she once collapsed at school. She became one because she was the kind of person who wanted to know why a system behaved the way it did. The ER was part of her life. It did not get to own the rest of it. Her 18th birthday came 2 months before graduation. There was no dramatic ceremony around the end of the caregiving delegation. No lawyer, no judge. No one handed me a plaque for 8 years of school forms and dentist appointments. The authority simply expired. Kelsey was an adult. For the first time since she was 9, there was no document giving me permission to sign for her. She could sign for herself. That mattered more than I expected. I took the old folder from the desk and moved it into a storage box. Kelsey watched me. That's weird. What is? You not being allowed to sign my stuff. I'm still allowed to remind you to sign your stuff. That seems unconstitutional. My house. Not for much longer. The words could have hurt. They did not. That surprised me. For years, people assumed I would fall apart when Kelsey left. Tracy once told me, "I don't know what you'll do when she doesn't need you anymore." The question said more about Tracy than it did about me. I had a job, friends, a standing Thursday dinner with 2 women I had known for 15 years. I liked bad mystery novels and quiet Sunday mornings. I had never raised Kelsey, so she would remain dependent on me. If anything, the whole point was to make sure she could leave safely. Graduation came in June. Todd arrived. Tracy arrived with Neil, Owen, and Sophie. Nobody fought. That alone felt historic. When the ceremony ended, Kelsey found me in the crowd and held up her diploma. I'm free. Until August. She frowned. You ruin everything. You enrolled in a 6-year program. I'm managing expectations. Todd came over a few minutes later. He handed Kelsey a card. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Dad. He looked at me. You helping her move? She's helping herself move. I'm driving the truck. I can come. Kelsey looked at him. When? Todd opened his mouth. For years, I knew exactly what would have come next. What day is it? Whose time is it? What does the schedule say? Instead, he asked, What day do you need me? Kelsey noticed. So did I. Saturday the 10th. Todd took out his phone. Morning? Yeah, I'll be there. No reference to Tracy. No reference to a court order that had stopped mattering. Just a date. It should not have felt significant. It did. Todd showed up that Saturday at 8:15. We had said 8:30. He brought coffee. I stared at him. What? You're early. Traffic was better than I expected. You could have waited around the corner. I considered it. Kelsey came out carrying a box. Are you two flirting? Todd nearly choked on his coffee. I laughed so hard I had to put down the lamp I was carrying. That was another thing adulthood changed. Todd stopped feeling like a man I had to negotiate with on Kelsey's behalf. He became someone Kelsey could choose to call. Or not. At first, he did not seem to know how to operate without the old structure. He would text me instead of her. Does Kelsey know when she's coming home next? I would reply, Ask Kelsey. He would ask me what weekend worked. I would write, She is 18. Once he called. I'm trying not to bother her. She's in medical school. You're going to bother her eventually. That's not helpful. Then, call your daughter. He did. Kelsey told me later. Not everything, just enough. At first she found it strange, then useful. Todd called once to ask how an exam went without me reminding him there was an exam. The next month, he mailed her a package with the specific kind of tea she liked because she had mentioned running out during a phone call. No birthday, no holiday, no audience, just tea. When Kelsey called me that night, she said, "Dad remembered." I knew exactly what she meant. The tea? That too. I smiled. She heard it. Don't make it a big deal. I didn't say anything. You smiled. You can hear smiles now? Yours? Yes. Occupational hazard. She groaned. The bigger moment came her second year away. Kelsey had a difficult week and called Todd herself. That alone told me more than the details. Years earlier, Todd had been someone she waited for. Now he was someone she sometimes reached toward. Not always. Not automatically. But by choice. Tracy changed too. Just not in the same direction. The more Kelsey accomplished, the more Tracy started using words that sounded polished. At first, she had said Kelsey was comfortable with me. Then she said Kelsey had needed stability. By the time Kelsey entered the combined program, Tracy had started saying something else. We always knew Gail could give her consistency. The first time I heard it, we were at a small family lunch. Owen had asked how Kelsey was doing. I said she was buried in coursework. Tracy smiled. She always needed structure. Gail was the right person for that. I looked at her. The right person. For what? For that phase of her life. That phase lasted 9 years. Neil glanced down at his plate. Tracy ignored the number. Sometimes good parenting means knowing what your child needs. Kelsey was not there. That mattered. Tracy said those things most confidently when the person whose life she was describing was absent. I said nothing, not because I agreed, because I was beginning to understand how her story worked. Every few years, she did not merely repeat it. She upgraded it. First, she had been overwhelmed. Then Kelsey had been comfortable. Then Kelsey had chosen stability. Now Tracy had made a wise parental decision. The same event kept acquiring better intentions as the outcome improved. By Kelsey's 3rd year in Missouri, Tracy had started introducing her as my daughter in the medical program. There was nothing technically false about that. Kelsey was her daughter. But the pride arrived without the years in between. The dentist, the permission slips, the sick nights, the renewals, the drawers. All the ordinary things Tracy once considered too small to carry. One evening, Kelsey called while I was folding laundry. "Mom told somebody you raised me because they wanted me to have consistency." "Who?" "One of Neil's coworkers." "What did you say?" "Nothing." "Why?" I wanted to hear the whole version. I sat on the edge of the bed. "And?" She said, "We made that choice for her." The room went very still. Kelsey continued. She said it like there was a meeting. I did not answer immediately, because I remembered the actual beginning. A 9-year-old holding a discharge packet, a father saying it was not his week, a mother saying she had real children at home. There had been no meeting, no thoughtful family decision, no plan built around Kelsey's future. There had been one night, then another, then papers, then years. "What did you say?" I asked. I asked her what choice. "And?" She said, "Letting me stay with you." Kelsey laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Letting me." I stared at the laundry in my lap. "What do you think?" "I think the story keeps getting nicer." I closed my eyes. She was right. The more successful Kelsey became, the more noble the beginning sounded. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. For now?" "For now." There was a pause. Then she added, "I just wanted to tell you I noticed." I noticed too. After we hung up, I went into the kitchen. The old refrigerator calendar was still there. though I used it mostly for my own schedule now. No custody weekends, no pickup negotiations, no names written with question marks. For 9 years, Todd had used a calendar to decide when responsibility belonged to him. For 9 years, Tracy had used Kelsey's stability to explain why responsibility no longer needed to return to her. Now Kelsey was 18, then 19, then 20. No court order told either of them what to do anymore. That should have made everything simpler. Instead, it revealed something I had missed when she was little. Once the rules disappeared, every phone call became a choice. Every visit became a choice. Every remembered detail became a choice. And every version of the past became one too. Todd's change did not arrive with an apology. It arrived with a 3-hour drive for something almost nobody would have considered worth 3 hours. Kelsey was in the 4th year of her combined program by then. Most of her work had shifted into the medical and clinical side of the program, the part that made her phone calls shorter, her sleep worse, and her sense of humor drier. One Tuesday night, she called me while I was cleaning out the refrigerator. "I have a presentation Friday." "What kind?" "Nothing exciting." That narrows it down beautifully. "It's a small clinical reasoning thing. Students present cases to faculty." "You nervous?" "No." "That means yes." She laughed. Then she said, "Dad asked what time." I stopped throwing away expired mustard. "Todd? I only have one." "I'm checking." He said he might drive down. "For a student presentation?" "That's what I said." "And?" "He said he has vacation hours." I looked at the mustard bottle in my hand. "Are you inviting him?" I told him where it is. That was Kelsey's adult version of an invitation. Not begging, not testing. Information. What he did with it belonged to him. Friday afternoon, Todd sent me a picture. Not of himself, not of Kelsey. A paper cup of terrible hospital coffee beside a folded visitor badge. Under it he wrote, "She did good. Didn't want to distract her before she went back in." I called Kelsey that evening. "So? So what? Your father drove 3 hours to drink bad coffee." I noticed. "How was the presentation?" "Good." "How was he?" "Quiet." That must have been medically concerning. She laughed. Then her voice changed. "He didn't tell anyone he came." I understood why that mattered. Tracy liked visible moments. Todd had once liked measurable obligations. Neither had been especially good at doing something that earned no audience. What did he say when he left? Just that he was proud of me. "That's it, that's it." I waited. Kelsey finally said, "I liked that." I did not turn it into forgiveness. Neither did she. That was important. People love stories where one gesture heals 20 years. Real relationships are rarely that efficient. Todd's drive did not erase the emergency room. It simply became a new fact. And Kelsey had spent enough of her life learning not to erase one fact with another. Over the next year, Todd kept doing small things that would have looked unimpressive to anyone outside the family. He remembered when Kelsey had a difficult exam. He called the evening after rather than the morning before because she had once told him phone calls before exams irritated her. He learned the difference. When her car needed repairs during a particularly demanding stretch, he helped her compare estimates, instead of announcing he would take care of everything. That mattered too. Kelsey did not need another adult turning competence into control. The more Todd improved, the less I heard from him. That might sound strange. For years, I had been the bridge. Todd called me to ask what Kelsey was doing. I reminded him about dates. He sent information through me because speaking directly to his daughter meant risking an answer he could not manage. Now he called her. I became unnecessary in the healthiest possible way. One Sunday, I told Kelsey that, "You know your dad hasn't called me about you in almost 2 months. Congratulations. I feel abandoned. You'll survive. After everything I've done." She laughed. Then she became serious. "He's trying." "Yes." You think so? I think driving 3 hours for a presentation nobody photographed counts as trying. She was quiet. Does that mean I have to forgive him? No. The answer came easily. Does it mean I should? That part isn't mine. She sighed. I hate when you get reasonable. I've been working on it. She did not ask the question again. A month later, she answered it in her own way. She called Todd about the emergency room. I did not know she planned to do it. She told me afterward. I was sitting on my back steps one evening when her name appeared on my phone. You busy? No. I talked to Dad. Her tone told me which conversation she meant before she explained it. About what? His week. I sat up. Okay. I asked if he remembered saying it. And he said yes. That surprised me. Not because I thought Todd had forgotten. Because for years he had survived by adding context to facts until the facts sounded less ugly. He didn't say the nurse misunderstood? No. He didn't say he meant something else? No. I waited, Kelsey continued. He said he knew it was Mom's parenting time. He said they had already been fighting about schedule changes that month, and he thought if he went running in every time she didn't handle something, she would keep doing it. That sounds like him. He said he used the custody order because it gave him a reason not to fight with her. I leaned my elbows on my knees. What did you say? I told him, you avoided the fight. I got the consequence. The sentence made me close my eyes. Not because it was cruel, because it was exact. What did he say? Nothing for a while. And then? He said, you're right. I did not speak. Kelsey gave a short laugh. I didn't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything. He said he'd spent years telling himself that following the schedule made him fair. Yes, he said it made him a coward. I looked out across the small patch of yard behind my townhouse. Todd Grant had never been a man who used dramatic words about himself. That one mattered. Did he apologize? Yes. How? Kelsey was quiet for a moment. He said, I'm sorry I made a rule more important than you. I let the silence sit. Then I asked, did that help? Yes. Did it fix it? No. Both can be true. I know. That was one of the things I admired most about the woman Kelsey had become. She no longer seemed interested in forcing human beings into one category. Good. Bad. Forgiven. Unforgiven. Todd had failed her. Todd was trying. Those facts could occupy the same room. Tracy had more trouble with rooms that contained conflicting facts. By then, Kelsey's progress through medical training had become one of Tracy's favorite subjects. She knew how to mention it casually. My daughter's in medical school. Kelsey's almost a doctor. We always knew she'd go far. None of those statements were false. That was what made them slippery. One afternoon, Tracy called while I was at work. Do you know when Kelsey finds out about residency interviews? No. You usually know everything. She's 23. I'm her mother. I almost laughed. That answer still doesn't make me know her schedule. Tracy ignored the point. She never tells me anything anymore. Ask her. I do. Then accept the amount she chooses to tell you. You make everything sound like a boundary. Sometimes it is. Her voice cooled. You've really trained her well. That irritated me. Kelsey trained herself. You know what I mean. There was that phrase again. It had survived 15 years. No, Tracy. I stopped assuming that a long time ago. She sighed. I was talking to someone at work about her yesterday. They said it was amazing we were willing to put our own feelings aside and let her have the stability she needed. I went still. Who told them that? What? That you put your feelings aside. I was explaining the situation. Which version? Her silence changed. Not confusion. Annoyance. Gail, I'm not doing this with you. Good. I made decisions as her mother. You made decisions. Yes. And now you're assigning motives 15 years later. I did what was best for her. There it was. A new sentence. Not I was overwhelmed. Not she was comfortable. Not she preferred you. We did what was best. The event had moved again. I looked at the clock on my office wall. You should be careful with that story. Is that a threat? No. What is it? Advice. I know what happened. So does Kelsey. Tracy ended the call. A few weeks later, Kelsey told me Neil had begun asking questions. Not accusing Tracy. Questions. Apparently, he had heard her tell another couple that Gail had given Kelsey the consistency we couldn't provide at the time. Neil asked Kelsey later whether that was how she remembered it. I only knew this because Kelsey told me during one of our Sunday calls. What did you say? I told him Mom used to say his house wasn't ready for me. And he looked sick. Did he say anything? He said she never told him she wanted me there, and he refused. That's consistent with what he told you before. I know. Kelsey paused. Then Sophie said Mom always told them I didn't want to live with them. 3 versions. Now the people who had received them were beginning to compare. Slowly. Not enough for an explosion. Enough for discomfort. Did Tracy hear that conversation? No. Good. Why good? Because people should understand what they remember before somebody starts explaining it for them. Kelsey laughed. You're getting cynical. I prefer experienced. The invitation arrived in February. Not to graduation. To speak. Kelsey called me at 7 in the morning, which meant either something was wrong or she had forgotten that ordinary people respected clocks. I got selected. For what? The commencement address. I sat straight up in bed. You're speaking? One of the student speakers. At graduation. That is generally where commencement speeches happen. Do you want me to be proud or irritated by your tone? Both. I smiled into the darkness. How did this happen? Faculty nominations. Service stuff. Academic record. Interview. You didn't tell me. I didn't think I'd get it. You're terrible. I learned from family. Too soon. 15 years is too soon? I laughed. She did too. Then she said, I'm inviting everybody. I knew who she meant. Everybody? You, Dad, Mom, Neil, Owen, Sophie. I let that settle. Okay. You think it's a bad idea? No, you hesitated. I was thinking. About? Whether you're inviting them because you want them there or because you think it proves something. It doesn't prove anything. Good. I want them there. Then invite them. She did. Todd accepted almost immediately. Neil replied separately and thanked her. Owen and Sophie were excited. Tracy called Kelsey instead of simply responding. I heard about that conversation the next day. She wants to know how we're introduced. I stared at my phone. What? She asked if there'll be some family reception thing. There probably is. She said she didn't want anything to be awkward. Meaning? She asked if she can call them the family who supported me from afar. I closed my eyes. That is impressively specific. I said no. What did she say? That it's true. And? I said, then you should be able to say it without needing my permission. I smiled. That sounds like you. She didn't like it. I imagine not. Kelsey grew quiet. I'm not planning to do anything at graduation. I didn't think you were. I mean it. Kels. What? You invited them because you want them there. That's enough. I don't want the day to become about this. Then don't make it about this. She exhaled. Okay. There was no plan, no trap, no hidden file, no speech drafted in revenge. Kelsey was preparing a commencement address about responsibility in medicine, teamwork, and the danger of assuming somebody else would solve the problem in front of you. She did not tell me every line. I did not ask. For once, the milestone belonged to her before it belonged to the family. Todd called me 2 weeks before graduation. That surprised me. I booked my hotel. Good. Same place as you? No. Okay. I waited. He cleared his throat. Kelsey seems stressed. She's graduating from medical school. I know. I think stress is traditional. I just don't want her thinking I'll cancel. That caught my attention. Then don't cancel. I won't. You don't need me to tell her that. I know. Another pause. Then he said, she invited me after everything. Yes. I want to get this one right. I thought about the emergency room, about the clock beside the couch when he was supposed to arrive at 6, about years of question marks on the refrigerator calendar. You know what getting it right requires? What? Show up. I will. The next evening, Kelsey called. Dad confirmed his flight and hotel. He called me too. He did? Yes. What did he want? To make sure you knew he was coming. She was quiet. Then she said, he told me. I'll be there. I remembered every version of Todd that had existed in Kelsey's life. The man who said it was not his week. The man who could always explain what he had technically done. The man who eventually admitted the rule had been cowardice. The man who drove 3 hours for a presentation no one photographed. Do you believe him? I asked. This time Kelsey did not hedge. She did not say maybe. She did not say we'll see. Yes, she said. And for the first time in 15 years, when Todd Grant promised his daughter he would be somewhere, I believed him too. Todd kept his promise. He was standing in the hotel lobby when I came down that morning, already dressed, coffee in one hand, and the ceremony program folded under his arm. You're early, I said. He looked at his watch. It starts in 2 hours. That has never stopped you from being late before. He smiled without defending himself. That mattered. 15 years earlier, Todd would have explained traffic, work, custody language, or why the clock was technically somebody else's problem. Now, he simply followed me outside. The university had moved the health sciences commencement into a large arena because the medical, dental, pharmacy, nursing, and allied health graduates were all being recognized in the same ceremony. By the time we arrived, families were already streaming through the entrances with bouquets, garment bags, cameras, and children wearing oversized university shirts. The place was loud enough to make ordinary conversation difficult. I liked that. Noise gave everybody less room to perform. Kelsey had texted me at 6:30. Rehearsal done. Don't let Mom reorganize seating. I had replied, no promises. I'm only one woman. She sent back, you've survived worse systems. I smiled when I reread it. Todd glanced at my phone. Kelsey? Yes. Nervous? She says no. So yes. Exactly. We found the family meeting area outside the arena before the doors opened. Neil was there first with Owen and Sophie. Owen was 20 by then, taller than Neil, and still carrying himself with the slightly awkward looseness of someone not entirely comfortable in formal clothes. Sophie had just turned 18. She had Tracy's eyes but not Tracy's instinct to fill silence. Neil shook Todd's hand. No tension. No warmth either. Just adulthood. Then Tracy appeared. She wore a navy dress, low heels, and the kind of expression people use when they want a day to photograph well. There you are. She hugged me before I could decide whether I wanted to be hugged. Then she looked around. Where's Kelsey? Backstage. I thought we were getting pictures before. She has rehearsal. Tracy frowned. She said we'd have time. She said there might be time. That sounds like her. Sophie looked toward the arena entrance. She's speaking after the degrees, right? Yes. I said. Tracy brightened immediately. Dr. Kelsey Grant. Owen smiled. That sounds weird. It sounds earned, Neil said. That was the first moment I saw Tracy's face change. Only slightly. Pride moved through it. But not the uncomplicated kind. Something else was there too. Ownership. We were allowed into the arena a few minutes later. The scale of it hit me immediately. Thousands of seats rose around the floor. Faculty in academic robes gathered near the stage. Families waved from the stands whenever they spotted a graduate below. Todd stopped beside me. She did all this. Kelsey did. He nodded. I heard the distinction in my own answer. Not we. Not Gail and Kelsey. Not the family. Kelsey. For years I had been the person signing forms because she was too young to sign them herself. That morning, every credential attached to her name belonged to her. Tracy was already taking pictures. The stage, the banners, the program, the giant university seal. Then she held up the printed commencement booklet. Look, her name. It was there beneath the student speaker section. Kelsey Grant. I felt something shift inside me that I did not try to name. My niece. My responsibility for years. The child who had once slept in my spare room wearing one of my old t-shirts. My daughter. I let the thought exist. I did not need to say it. I did not need Kelsey to repeat it back. Some truths did not need promotion. We found our seats. Todd sat beside me. Tracy and Neil were on the other side, with Owen and Sophie. For a while, the ceremony protected us from ourselves. Music, faculty procession, names, degrees, rounds of applause. When the medical degree candidates stood, I saw Kelsey in the middle rows. She found us. Todd raised one hand. Kelsey smiled. Not the polite smile she gave cameras. The real one. Then the medical degrees were formally conferred. The dean asked the graduates to turn their tassels. For the first time, the title became true. Dr. Kelsey Grant. I clapped until my palms hurt. Todd did too. Tracy was crying. I looked at her. That complicated me, because her tears were real. That was the problem with Tracy. The worst thing she had done did not erase every loving feeling she had ever had. It would have been easier if they had. After the degree conferral, there was a short break before the graduate addresses. Families were allowed into a nearby reception area, while the speakers and faculty repositioned. Kelsey found us near a bank of tall windows. She still had her robe on. Todd reached her first. You did it. Kelsey hugged him. I did. He held her a second longer than I expected. Then he stepped back. Dr. Grant. She made a face. Please don't. That means I'm definitely doing it. Neil hugged her next. Owen said, Do I have to call you doctor now? No, Sophie said. Can I when you're annoying? Especially then. Then Kelsey came to me. I did not say anything. I just held her. She whispered, You okay? I'm fine. You're crying. I have allergies. In an arena? Very aggressive carpeting. She laughed into my shoulder. When she pulled back, Tracy was already calling for a photograph. Everybody together. Kelsey's expression changed. Not badly. Just carefully. Mom, I have to go back in a few minutes. Then quickly. We arranged ourselves near the windows. A faculty member passed and recognized Kelsey. Dr. Grant. Kelsey turned. It was one of her professors, a woman in a green-trimmed academic robe. Professor Hall. Congratulations. Thank you. Professor Hall glanced at us. Your whole support system made it. The sentence was harmless. Warm. Exactly the kind of thing people say at graduations. Tracy answered before anyone else could. Yes, we wouldn't have missed this. Professor Hall smiled. You must be very proud. More than you know. Tracy put one hand against her chest. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire morning. Letting Gail raise her was the hardest sacrifice we ever made. Everything around me kept moving. People laughed nearby. A camera flashed. A child ran past holding a graduation cap. But inside our little circle, the air stopped. I looked at Neil first. His forehead tightened. Owen looked from Tracy to Kelsey. Sophie's face went blank. Kelsey did not move. Professor Hall, unaware of what she had stepped into, said softly, "That must have been very difficult." Tracy nodded. We knew Kelsey needed consistency. Sometimes being a parent means putting your own feelings aside and doing what's best for your child. There it was, the final version. Not overwhelmed. Not temporary. Not Kelsey chose Gail. Not Neil's house was too complicated. Sacrifice. I looked at Kelsey. She was looking at Todd. That was when I understood the real danger of the moment. Tracy had spent years changing the story. Todd had spent years avoiding it. But he had changed. At least privately. He had told Kelsey the truth about the ER. He had admitted cowardice. He had said the rule mattered more to him than she did. Kelsey knew that. I knew that. Now she was giving him one silent opportunity. Correct it. That was all. Todd saw the look. I know he did. His mouth opened. Professor Hall turned toward him. "You're Kelsey's father?" Todd nodded. Yes. He could have said, "It wasn't a sacrifice." He could have said, "Gail stepped in because we failed." He could have said nothing. Instead, he smiled weakly. "We did what was best for her." I felt something drop inside me. Not surprise. Disappointment. That hurt more. Kelsey's face barely changed, but I saw her shoulders settle. Not collapse. Settle. Like a door closing quietly. Professor Hall excused herself a moment later. She had another graduate to greet. Tracy exhaled as if the conversation had gone beautifully. "See? She understands." Nobody answered. Neil turned toward her. "What did you mean by letting Gail raise her?" Tracy looked at him. "What? You told me Kelsey wanted to stay with Gail." Tracy's smile remained, but it no longer fit her face. She did. "Then why are you calling it a sacrifice?" "Neil, not here." It was complicated. Kelsey glanced at the clock above the reception doors. "I have to go." Tracy looked at her. "Kels, wait. I have a speech." Todd stepped toward her. "Kelsey." She looked at him. He swallowed. "Good luck." Kelsey nodded. "Thanks." Then she walked away. I followed her with my eyes until she disappeared through the doors, leading back toward the stage area. Todd stood beside me, staring at the floor. He knew what he had failed to say. I did not need to explain it to him before Kelsey took the stage. An usher called families back toward their seats. The graduate address would begin shortly. We returned to the arena without resolving anything. That was probably the only reason we all made it back into the same row. Todd sat beside me again. This time he did not touch the program. Tracy sat rigidly next to Neil. Sophie stared at the stage. Owen kept rubbing his thumb against the edge of his ticket. I looked toward the speaker entrance. Kelsey appeared beside the dean. She held several pages in one hand. Her prepared speech. I knew the general subject. Responsibility, medicine, the danger of assuming someone else will solve the problem in front of you. Nothing about Tracy, nothing about Todd, nothing about the ER. At least not when she had written it. The dean stepped toward the lectern. Our next speaker graduated today with distinction and has been recognized by her faculty and classmates for service, academic excellence, and clinical leadership. Applause rolled across the arena. Todd looked up. Tracy did too. "Please welcome Dr. Kelsey Grant." Kelsey walked onto the stage. Thousands of people applauded. She reached the dean. He smiled and held out the microphone. Kelsey took it. Then she looked toward our section. For 1 second, her eyes stopped on Todd, then Tracy, then me. She smiled and looked down at the speech in her hands. Kelsey stood at the center of the stage, with the microphone in one hand and her prepared speech in the other. For the first few seconds, she followed the pages. She thanked the faculty. She thanked the families who had crossed states, rearranged work schedules, and sat through years of uncertainty beside the people graduating that morning. Her voice was steady, professional, exactly what I had expected. Then she looked toward our section again. I saw the moment the speech changed. Kelsey lowered her eyes to the pages, folded them once, and placed them on the lectern. Todd stopped moving beside me. Tracy leaned forward. Kelsey smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not an angry one. The same small smile she used when she had finally decided how to answer a difficult question. "When I was 9 years old," she said, "I learned something about responsibility before I knew enough to call it that." The arena quieted. She did not rush. I collapsed during a school field day and ended up in an emergency room. The hospital called my father. Todd's hand tightened around the program. Kelsey looked in our direction. His answer was, "It's not my week." The words traveled farther in that arena than they ever had in the small hospital hallway where I first heard them. No one laughed. No one moved, Kelsey continued. Then the hospital called my mother. Tracy's face had gone completely still. She said, "I have real children at home now." I heard Sophie inhale beside Neil. That was the first time she had ever heard the exact sentence. Her head turned toward Tracy so slowly it looked painful. Kelsey did not look away. I was treated. I was safe. An adult came for me. She paused. And today, 15 years later, I heard that decision described as a sacrifice. The silence changed. Before, people had simply been listening. Now they understood there was someone in the room who had used that word. Kelsey rested both hands on the lectern. "I've spent a lot of years thinking about what sacrifice means." She glanced down once, not at her pages, but at her own hands. "I don't think sacrifice is giving up a responsibility, because it is inconvenient, and then claiming the outcome when somebody else carries it for you." Todd lowered his head. Tracy looked at me. For one strange second, I think she expected me to stop this. I stayed seated. Kelsey went on. "A child is not something a parent gets to give away and later take credit for." No one in our row moved. Somewhere high in the arena, a baby made a small noise and was quickly hushed. Kelsey's voice remained calm. "That lesson matters to me today, because medicine gives us 1,000 ways to pass responsibility. Different departments, different shifts, different teams, different charts, different people whose names are attached to different boxes." She let the idea settle. But a person can disappear inside those boxes if everyone decides the problem belongs to somebody else. I felt my throat tighten. The first adult who came for me that day never asked whose week it was. My vision blurred. I looked down because I did not want her to see me crying from the stage. Todd did. I felt him turn toward me. I ignored him. Kelsey continued. She did not know she was making a 15-year commitment. She thought she was taking me home for one night. A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Not laughter exactly. Recognition. She did not need to know how long it would last before deciding that somebody needed to come. I pressed my lips together. Kelsey looked toward the graduates seated below her. "So, as we leave here today, I hope we remember that care is not the title printed beside our names. It is what we do when the problem is inconvenient, when nobody is watching, and when we could easily convince ourselves that someone else should handle it." The faculty behind her were completely still. Sometimes the most important question will not be whether something is technically yours. She paused. It will be whether you are the person standing close enough to help. Then she picked up her prepared pages again. She did not return to her parents. She did not list old injuries. She did not ask the room to judge them. She simply finished the commencement speech she had intended to give. She talked about uncertainty, humility. The danger of believing knowledge automatically made someone compassionate, and the obligation to remain curious when a patient's reality did not fit the explanation everyone had already accepted. When she reached the last line, she thanked the people who had taught her that responsibility was something practiced, not claimed. Then she stepped back. For one breath, the arena stayed silent. A real silence. The kind that makes thousands of people suddenly aware of their own bodies. Then applause began. Not all at once. It started in sections. Graduates first, then faculty, then the stands. It grew until the entire arena seemed to shake. Kelsey did not raise her hands. She did not look toward Tracy. She nodded once to the dean, handed him the microphone, and walked back to her seat. Todd clapped. I watched him. His eyes were wet. Tracy did not clap at first. Sophie did. So did Owen. Neil stood. That made Tracy look at him. He kept clapping. Finally, Tracy brought her hands together, but it was too late for the gesture to mean what she wanted it to mean. The rest of the ceremony passed strangely. Names were called, degrees were celebrated, music played. But our row had become a different place. Nobody spoke until we were outside the arena. Families crowded the walkways, graduates searched for parents, people took pictures beneath banners and beside fountains. Kelsey was still inside with her class. The 6 of us stood together near a concrete planter, because nobody seemed to know where else to go. Tracy spoke first. That was inappropriate. Neil looked at her. What part? She stared at him. You know what part. No. His voice was quiet. I don't. She used a graduation speech to humiliate her parents. Todd flinched. I noticed. Tracy did not. Neil said, She told the truth. You don't know what happened. I know what you told me. Tracy crossed her arms. This is not the place. Sophie laughed once. It was a sharp little sound. Apparently nowhere is the place. Tracy turned. Sophie, no. You told us Kelsey didn't want to live with us. I told you she was happy with Gail. That's not what you said. Owen spoke next. You said she didn't want to move in. I said she was settled. You said she liked her other life better. Tracy looked between them. I was trying to protect you. From what? Sophie asked. That stopped her. Sophie's voice shook now. From finding out our sister didn't actually reject us? Tracy's face changed. I never said she rejected you. You didn't have to use that word. I watched my sister search for a sentence that would restore order. For 15 years, that had been one of her gifts. She could make a bad choice sound complicated, a selfish choice sound protective, a decision sound like circumstance. This time, every person who had received one of those explanations was standing close enough to compare notes. Neil looked at her. You told me she wanted to stay with Gail. She did. No. His tone hardened for the first time. You told me she had already decided. Tracy looked at him. She was happy there. That is not the same thing. I was trying to keep her life stable. You also told her my house wasn't ready for her. Tracy turned toward me. I said nothing. Neil noticed. That's true? I answered only what I knew. That's what Tracy told Kelsey. Neil looked back at his wife. You used me. Don't be ridiculous. You told her I was the reason she couldn't come home. I never said that. You told me she didn't want to come. That's not what I meant. There it was. What I meant. The old escape hatch. Neil shook his head. No, Tracy blinked. No what? No more telling me what everybody else meant. The words surprised even me. Sophie looked at Kelsey's mother as if she were seeing a stranger. Todd remained silent. I turned toward him. You have something to say? Tracy answered before he could. Todd is not part of this. He looked at her. I am part of it. Tracy stared at him. Todd folded the ceremony program in half. I was wrong this morning. You agreed with me. I know. Because you know we were trying to do what was best. No. The word landed quietly. Todd opened his eyes. I agreed because Professor Hall was standing there, and I didn't want to admit in front of a stranger that I had failed my daughter. He looked toward the arena doors. And I failed her again. Tracy's voice dropped. So, now everyone gets to rewrite me? Neil almost laughed. That's what you think is happening? I was there. So was Kelsey. She was 9. Exactly. Tracy looked at me. And you've wanted this for years. I stared at her. Wanted what? To be the one she chose. The accusation was so far from what I felt that I almost missed its meaning. Tracy, this was never a contest. It was to you. No. You raised her. Yes. You signed everything. Because you gave me the authority. You made yourself necessary. That one hurt. Not because it was true, because for 1 second it touched the oldest fear I had carried through all those years. Had I liked being needed? Yes. Had I sometimes been too certain that my way was better? Yes. Had I become comfortable being the person Kelsey relied on? Of course. None of that changed why the arrangement started. I didn't make you stay home from the ER. Tracy's face hardened. I continued. I didn't make Todd say it wasn't his week. I didn't tell Neil that Kelsey wanted me. I didn't tell Owen and Sophie that she didn't want them. My voice remained low, and I didn't call any of it a sacrifice. Tracy looked around. At Todd, Neil, Owen, Sophie, me. She had always survived by changing the audience. If I challenged her, she talked to Todd. If Todd pushed back, she blamed the custody arrangement. If Neil asked questions, she said Kelsey wanted stability. If the children wondered where their sister was, she said Kelsey preferred another life. Now there was nowhere to move the story. It was complicated, she said. No one answered. She repeated it. You all keep reducing 15 years to one night. It was complicated. Neil looked at her. What exactly was complicated? Tracy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not enough to save her. The arena doors opened behind us. Graduates began spilling outside. White coats draped over arms. Caps in hands. Families calling names. Sophie saw Kelsey first. There she is. Kelsey came down the steps with 2 classmates. She spotted us. Her eyes moved from face to face. She knew immediately that the conversation had continued. Tracy stepped toward her. Kelsey. Kelsey stopped. I would like to talk to you. Not now. You said what you wanted to say in front of thousands of people. Kelsey's expression did not change. No, I said what was true in front of thousands of people. That is not the same thing. It is to me. Tracy glanced around at the people passing us. Can we please do this somewhere private? Kelsey looked at Owen and Sophie. Then Neil, then Todd. Finally me. I'm going to take pictures with my class. Tracy stared at her. Kelsey, I graduated today. I know. So I'm going to have my graduation. She turned to Owen and Sophie. You two coming? Sophie moved first. Yeah. Owen followed. Neil hesitated, then went with them. Todd stayed beside me. Tracy stood alone for 1 second before calling after Kelsey. I love you. Kelsey stopped. She turned. I know. It was the same answer she had once given Todd. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. A fact. Then she walked away. Tracy watched her go. I watched Tracy. She looked around as though waiting for someone to explain that Kelsey had misunderstood. Nobody did. The first thing Kelsey did after graduation was sleep for 11 hours. Not answer messages, not explain herself, not manage the adults she had just embarrassed. Sleep, I respected that. The next morning, I was sitting in the hotel lobby with coffee when she came downstairs in jeans and a university sweatshirt, hair pulled back, no makeup, looking more like the college kid she had been than the doctor everyone had applauded the day before. You hungry? Very. There's breakfast. Is Mom here? No. Dad? Checked out early. She nodded. Neil, Owen, and Sophie had left separately from Tracy the night before. I knew that because Neil had told me, not because I had been there when they made the decision. That distinction mattered. After 15 years of watching adults tell stories about Kelsey, I had become careful about telling stories I did not actually own. We found a table near the window. Kelsey poured syrup over a waffle and ate 3 bites before speaking. Did I ruin graduation? No. You answered too fast. I had 15 years to prepare. She looked at me. I mean it. So do I. She cut another piece. Mom thinks I humiliated her. I know. Dad thinks he failed again. He told you? He texted. What did he say? Kelsey pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. Todd's message was short. I'm sorry I helped turn your history into something easier for me to live with. I know saying it privately before wasn't enough. I won't ask you to answer today. I read it twice. He's getting better at words. He's getting better at not adding but. That too. Kelsey put the phone away. Do you think he meant it? Yes. She stared at her plate. That's annoying. Why? Because it would be easier if he hadn't changed at all. I understood. Todd had failed her, changed in real ways, and then failed again when public shame reached him. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. Good. She looked up. Good? You don't owe anybody an immediate, permanent decision. She smiled faintly. You really have changed. Don't spread it around. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Kelsey said Sophie had called the night before. She had spent years believing Kelsey preferred another family, and had even wondered what was wrong with her. Kelsey told her the simplest truth. She had never chosen against Owen or Sophie. She asked if we can start over, Kelsey said. What did you say? I said we can start from now. That isn't the same thing. Neil called me 3 days after graduation. We had never been close, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I owe you an apology, he said. That's not really my department. I know, I should have asked Kelsey. Yes. I thought Tracy had. That was convenient. He did not argue. I liked the explanation, he said. It meant I didn't have to decide what my responsibility was. That was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say about those years. He had 2 young children, a second marriage, and a wife telling him that Kelsey was happier with me. He had accepted the version that required the least from him. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. You and Tracy? We're talking. He did not tell me they were divorcing, and I did not invent an ending for their marriage because it would make the story cleaner. Before we hung up, he said, for what it's worth, I never wanted Kelsey gone. I know that now. I wish she'd known then. So does she. Owen also reached out to Kelsey and apologized for the distance between them. She reminded him that he had been a child receiving an adult story. What mattered was that the siblings could finally speak to one another without Tracy translating either side. Tracy waited 9 days before asking Kelsey to meet. I did not attend. That was Kelsey's decision. I only know what she told me afterward. They met at a quiet coffee shop near Kelsey's temporary apartment. Tracy began by apologizing for the graduation reception. Not the ER, not the years, the reception. Kelsey let her finish. Then she asked one question. What are you sorry for? Tracy said she was sorry. Things had gotten so public. Kelsey told her that was not what she asked. Eventually, Tracy said she was sorry for telling different people different things. Then she tried to explain why. Kelsey stopped her. Not harshly, simply. I'm not asking for the explanation right now. Tracy apparently became frustrated. According to Kelsey, she said, "You can't understand what it was like unless I explain." Kelsey answered, "Understanding you is not the same as excusing what you did. I wished I had been there for that line. I was glad I wasn't." Some sentences should belong only to the person who earned them. Then Kelsey set her boundaries. No telling coworkers, relatives, or strangers that Gail raising her had been a sacrifice Tracy made. No describing Kelsey's medical career as evidence that Tracy's decision had been wise. No speaking for Kelsey about why she stayed with me. No telling Owen or Sophie what Kelsey really meant. And if Tracy wanted to describe the past, she could start with the simplest accurate version. She had failed to come to the hospital. She had let temporary care become long-term care. She had later explained that choice differently, depending on who was listening. Tracy asked whether Kelsey was cutting her off. Kelsey said no. That surprised me. When she told me, I asked why. Because I don't want to make permanent decisions while I'm still angry. Reasonable. And because I do love her. There it was. The fact revenge stories sometimes struggle to make room for. Kelsey loved Tracy. Tracy had also failed her. Neither truth erased the other. "What does contact look like?" I asked. "I don't know yet." Also reasonable. She doesn't get to decide the pace. That sounds important. It is. Todd's conversation came later. He drove to see Kelsey instead of asking her to fit him into a trip home. They met for lunch. Again, I only know what Kelsey chose to tell me. Todd apologized for graduation first. Specifically, no general statement about mistakes. No, we all did things wrong. He said he had known Tracy's sacrifice story was false, and when Professor Hall looked at him, he chose to protect himself from embarrassment. Kelsey asked why. Todd said, "Because admitting the truth privately made me feel brave. Admitting it in front of strangers made me feel ashamed." That sentence stayed with me when Kelsey repeated it. It was the most precise description of Todd I had ever heard. He had changed, but he had changed where it was safe first. Kelsey told him that. Then she said something else. "The last 5 years count." Todd looked surprised. "I know you drove down for me. I know you started remembering things. I know you apologized before graduation. I'm not pretending none of that happened." He thanked her. Then she continued, "But the ER counts too." Todd nodded. "And graduation counts." Another nod. "You don't get to use the good years to erase the bad ones." "I know. And I don't get to use the bad ones to pretend the good years were fake." Todd apparently looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's more generous than I deserve." Kelsey answered, "It isn't generosity, it's accuracy." When she told me that, I smiled. "What? You really were meant for medicine," she groaned. "Please stop connecting everything to medicine." "Sorry." "No, you're not." No. Todd stayed in her life. Not as the father he might have been if he had made different decisions when she was 9. That version of the relationship did not exist. He became the father he was capable of being at 51. Calls, visits, occasional advice, sometimes disappointment, sometimes trust. The relationship continued without pretending the damage had never happened. My relationship with Kelsey changed too. Residency was coming, with applications, credentialing, housing decisions, and schedules that made the refrigerator calendar of her childhood look simple. One evening, she called while I was repainting the old spare room. "What are you doing?" "Destroying your childhood." "What?" "Painting." "You're painting my room?" "It hasn't been your room in 6 years." "That is irrelevant. The walls are ugly. I picked that color. You were 14. It was sophisticated. It was purple. Plum. It looked like a bruise. She laughed. That room had once held a suitcase waiting to leave. Then drawers, school certificates, medical school brochures, and eventually boxes Kelsey packed herself. I was turning it back into an office, not because she had been erased, but because she had built a life large enough to leave it. A month after graduation, she came back to Minnesota for a quiet weekend. We bought groceries, moved a bookshelf, drank coffee, and argued about whether the faded dry erase calendar on my refrigerator still counted as useful. Nothing needed to be named or promoted. We already knew what we were to each other. 2 weeks later, she began residency onboarding. I knew because she called complaining about the amount of paperwork. "Justice," I told her. "This is not funny. I signed forms for you for 9 years. I was a child." "Exactly. Now it's your turn." She put me on speaker while she filled things out. I heard keyboard clicks. Name, address, insurance information, licenses, emergency contacts. Then she went quiet. "What?" "Nothing." "Kelsey, there's a box." "What kind?" "Emergency contact." I stopped what I was doing. 15 years disappeared. Fluorescent lights. A 9-year-old with a bandage above her temple. A packet in her hands. "Which one is coming?" I said nothing. The keyboard clicked. Kelsey spoke as she typed. "Gail Monroe." My throat tightened. Another pause. Then she laughed softly. "What?" "It wants relationship." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "What are you putting?" She waited long enough that I understood the question was not difficult. It was simply heavy. Then she said, "Aunt." One word. No upgrade. No replacement. No correction. Aunt. The person who had come to the ER. The person whose name had been added to school forms. The person who renewed temporary paperwork until temporary became childhood. The person who could be loved without taking somebody else's title. I smiled. Accurate. Very. I heard one final click through the phone. Done. On her screen, beside emergency contact, was my name. Beside relationship, one word. Aunt. Then Kelsey clicked save.